Shalom, shalom, everyone. So spring is here, and we've observed the Passover on the 14th day of the month. Now we are counting the OMER. Throughout time, the debate has been, when do we start this count? Some say it is after the Sabbath within the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But again, that is a debate within itself, as the question then arises, which Sabbath? Is it on the 16th after the Holy Convocation of Unleavened Bread? Or is it the weekly Sabbath? Others count after the Passover feast is completed, after the Feast of Unleavened Bread is done. So today we're going to look at scriptures and history in order to rightly divide the word and understand exactly where we are to start our count. Deuteronomy 16:9 tells us, 7 entire periods of 7 you shall count out for yourself with the beginning of your sickle upon the harvest. You shall begin to count out 7 periods of 7. So when does the sickle come upon the harvest? That is the question. What day is that? Our Creator uses cycles of 7 in numbering his days. Jahshua the Messiah is the first fruit of creation. 7 days after the resurrection, a count of 7, which could be viewed in the spiritual sense as a week of years or a spiritual jubilee, the set apart are waived. We are being waived before JAHUAH by our high priest, the first fruit Mashiach, the Messiah. He is our high priest who is waiving us, his first fruits. Deuteronomy 26, starting with verse 1. And it will be whenever you should enter into the land which the Creator, your Eloah, gives to you by lot to inherit it, and should dwell upon it, and that you shall take from the first of the fruits of your land, which the Creator, your Eloah, gives by lot, and you shall put them into a basket, and you shall go into the place whichever the Creator, your Eloah, should choose to call upon his name there. So we're not being told to come to the temple. This is not a pilgrim feast, but this is a time that we set aside to meet with our Creator, where he tells us to meet with him. And you shall come to the priest, whoever might be in those days. Now today, our high priest, like we said, is the Messiah. And you shall say to him, I announce today to the Creator, your Eloah. So we're making a proclamation. We're saying, today I announce that I have entered into the land which the Creator, your Eloah, swore by an oath to our fathers to give us. So to me, we are now in the spiritual land, the land of Debar, the Adama covenant land. We're in the body of the Messiah, and he is the Adama covenant land. He's the second Adam who's renewed the covenant with our Creator. And he is our ark of safety, and we are in him. So that is the land that we're in, and we proclaim that to our Creator, that we are now in the land. It's a proclamation that we're making. We are instructed to then count a group of 7 sevens to Shavuot, where we are to make another proclamation and take an oath, because to seven oneself means to take an oath. So this is really the feast of oaths, and we're going to make an oath to be betrothed to our kinsman and future king, the Messiah Jahshua. 7 one's self in Hebrew is bereth. So bereth is the Hebrew word for covenant, which means to cut as in a covenant or contract. According to some Bible scholars, it is related to the Akkadian word bera, meaning to establish a legal situation with an oath. It takes 2 parties to complete a covenant, and in order to make a covenant, these 2 parties must take an oath to abide by the terms of the covenant. So we're walking through these 7 sevens, and this is our time of taking oaths. So it is considered the days of courting. The common thread that ties Pesach, the bride selection, and Shavuot, the betrothal, together is counting the OMER. We're walking through these days of courting towards our betrothal. We were selected as the bride at Passover, where the bride price was paid. And then we go through the courting period, the counting of the OMER. This is the time when the bride and groom get a chance to be acquainted with one another. Each of the 49 days of counting the OMER is the incremental cycle moving toward unification of the groom and bride. Have you ever wondered why the book of Ruth was placed in the Bible to begin with? Her beautiful story shows us that this is a time of courting. It takes place during the shift from the barley harvest to wheat, the counting of the OMER. So we're going to read Ruth's story starting with Ruth, verse 2:23. And she kept close by the maidens of Boaz to glean until the end of the barley harvest and the wheat harvest, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So this is showing us this time period in which Ruth's story takes place. And the story implies that Boaz is much older than she. We do not know whether he was a bachelor or a widower, but we do know that he was a man of JAHUAH. When Naomi and Ruth had arrived in Bethlehem, the problem facing them was how to find enough food to eat. The Creator has made gracious provisions in the Mosaic Law for folks in their predicament. Farmers were not permitted to reap the corners of their grain fields, nor gather the gleanings. They were to leave them for the poor, for foreigners, for widows and orphans. Almost any way you look at it, Naomi and Ruth were qualified. They were poor widows, and Ruth was a foreigner. Since Naomi was getting a little too old to work in the fields, Ruth asked if she might go and find a field of some kind man who would allow her to glean, and Naomi gave her permission. Ruth 2, starting with verse 3. So she departed and went and gleaned in the field after the reapers. And she happened to come to the portion of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Every impulse in Ruth's body urged her to flee to the purple mountains of Moab, which she could see in the distance. That was her home. That is where she belonged. But with quiet courage, simple modesty, and total unselfishness, she labored on. And Boaz said to his servant, who was set over the reapers? Whose girl is this? And the servant who was set over the reapers answered and said, it is the girl from Moab who came back with Naomi out of the country of Moab. Boaz lost no time in doing something nice for Ruth. He invited her to stay in the fields and glean as much as she wanted. The work was not easy, stooping and bending all day as she gathered the grain, the burden getting heavier and heavier with each stalk she gleaned, the sun beating down on her back. Boaz let it be known that although she was not working for his gain, she was still welcome to drink freely from the water pitchers provided for his own workers. And it seemed that some of the men wanted to put their hands on her. Ruth 2:9. And let your eyes be unto the field wherever mine should harvest, and you should go after them. Behold, I gave charge to the servants not to touch you. And when you shall thirst, then you shall go to the vessels, and you shall drink from where the servants should draw water. Nowhere does it say that Ruth was a beautiful woman like Sarah, Rebecca, or Rachel. We do not know whether she was or not, but we do know that she had an inner beauty, a meek and quiet spirit, and unpretentious humility that made her one of the loveliest women in Scripture. She bowed low before Boaz in genuine gratitude and said, "Why have I found favor in your sight that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? You have comforted me, and indeed have spoken kindly to your maidservant, though I am not like one of your maidservants." At mealtime, he invited her to join him and his reapers for lunch, and he made sure she was served all she wanted. When she was finished eating and got up to return to work, Boaz said to his servants, verse 15 and 16, "Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not insult her. And also you shall purposely pull out for her some grain from the bundles, and leave it that she may glean, and do not reproach her." So Ruth continued to glean until evening, and when she winnowed out what she had gleaned, it was nearly a bushel of grain. It seems as though Boaz was a kind man, thoughtful, considerate, and gentle. It was time to make a move, and strangely enough, in that culture, it was Ruth's move to make. You see, JAHUAH gave another interesting law to the Hebrews that required a man to marry a childless widow of his dead brother. The firstborn son of that union would bear his brother's name and inherit his brother's property. We find reference to that in Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 7, and Leviticus 25, 23 through 28. It is called the law of the Levite marriage. The term Levite is a derivative of the word lever, meaning husband's brother. If no brother was available, a more distant relative might ask to fulfill this duty, but the widow would have to let him know that he was acceptable to be her goel, as they called it, her kinsman redeemer and provider. Naomi told Ruth exactly how to do that. Ruth listened carefully and carried out her instructions precisely. Boaz would be sleeping on the threshing floor that night to protect his grain from thieves. After he went to sleep, Ruth tippy-toed in and uncovered his feet and laid down. By this act, she was requesting Boaz to become her goel. Removing shoes was part of the covenant-making process in ancient Semitic societies. The ceremony of the shoe highlights that desire and commitment to connect to the bridegroom, that redemption might take place and an inheritance might be received. Needless to say, Boaz was somewhat startled when he rolled over in the middle of the night and realized there was a woman lying at his feet. Ruth 3:9. "Who are you?" he asked. I'm sure he was rubbing the sleep out of his eyes and was like, "Oh my goodness." And she answered, I am Ruth, your maid. So spread your tallit covering over your maid, for you are a close relative. And we see this in Ezekiel 16:8, where JAHUAH is speaking to us. And he says, I went by you, and behold, it is your time, and a time of resting up. And I opened and spread out my wings over you, this tallit. And I covered your indecency, and I swore an oath to you, and I entered into a covenant with you. Say, JAHUAH, your Eloah, and you became mine. So spreading his tallit over her would signify his willingness to become her protector and provider. His response was immediate. Ruth 3:10 and 11. May you be blessed of JAHUAH, my daughter. You have shown your last kindness to be better than the first by not going after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you whatever you ask. For all of my people in the city know that you are a woman of excellence. So it sounds like Ruth could have had her choice of men, and he felt blessed that she chose him because she was a woman of excellence. And it's important to understand that there was nothing immoral in this episode. This procedure was the custom of the day, and the record emphasizes the purity of it. Ruth 4:13. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and JAHUAH enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. Ruth entered Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest and married Boaz at the conclusion of the wheat harvest. Boaz represents our kinsman redeemer, Mashiach Jahshua, who was elected of JAHUAH to be our future husband and king after JAHUAH divorced Israel. So he divorced Israel. Israel could not return to the groom. It would be against Torah because Israel had committed adultery. And in his love for his people, our Creator sent his Son to be the kinsman so that we may return to our Creator. So this story of Ruth is us. Ruth denotes the bride elect. Jahshua was the first fruit of Yah, not the first fruits, meaning his resurrection was not tied to the Feast of First Fruits, which is agriculturally fixed. Proverbs 8:22. The supreme authority created me head of his ways for his works. Now the Hebrew word used here for head isn't Rosh, as you would expect, but rather Reshith, meaning the first in place, time, order, or rank, specifically a first fruit, beginning, chief, first, or principal thing. So Jahshua is the first fruit. We can also see a divine correlation between Jahshua being the first fruit and Adam, the elect, being the first fruits by looking back to the time of this creation. In the beginning, JAHUAH created the light. Genesis 1:3. And JAHUAH said, "Let there be light," and there was light. John 8:12 tells us, "I am the light of the world." Genesis 2:7. And Eloah shaped the man, taking dust from the earth, and he breathed into his face breath of life, and Adam became a living soul. So 7 days after the light, Jahshua, appeared, then came the chosen man, Adam, the first fruits of Yah's labor. Now, I'm not saying that Jahshua was created on that first day of this earth's creation or recreation. As we know, he was at the beginning of time. But we can see a divine correlation here of the first fruit in the light of the world and the chosen elect, the first fruits, Adam, who was placed in the covered over garden of appointed times 7 days later. An oath later, that covered over protected garden. The reaping festival was then celebrated off and on by men until it was commanded at Mount Sinai. We read in Jubilees 6:18 and 19. This entire festival had been celebrated in heaven from the time of creation until the lifetime of Noah, for 26 jubilees and 5 weeks of years. Then Noah and his sons kept it for 7 jubilees and 1 week of years until Noah's death. From the day of Noah's death, his sons corrupted it. So they didn't keep it any longer. They were going by the ways of the world and the pagans until Abraham's lifetime, and they were eating blood. Abraham alone kept it, and his sons Isaac and Jacob kept it until your lifetime. During your lifetime, the Israelites had forgotten until I renewed it for them at this mountain. So we, the elect, were chosen on the 8th day of creation to be placed in the covered over garden of appointed times of JAHUAH, to be as a bride. In order to make that marriage complete, we must seven ourselves, or take an oath of promise to follow the terms of the covenant contract. All Yahweh's dealings with men are of a covenant nature. He will not exchange with us except through a covenant, nor can we exchange with him except in the same manner. A covenant is the most solemn, binding, and intimate contract we know. The Hebrew phrase for make a covenant is karath bereth, which more literally is translated cut a covenant, and ratified by passing between pieces of cut flesh. The verb karath means to divide or cut in two, or to make a covenant. We can now begin to understand the double nature of this feast, the covenant side and the harvest agricultural side. The newly installed nation of Israel had made their oath to JAHUAH and became betrothed to him on Shavuot, and yet they are told in Leviticus 23:10, "Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when you come into the land which I am giving you, and reap the harvest thereof, you must bring a sheaf, an OMER of the firstfruits of your harvest to the priest. When wandering through the wilderness, there are no firstfruits to be offered to JAHUAH for us, to be accepted into his presence. It is only after we have left the wilderness and come into the land, in my opinion, is the land of Debar, the land of the living word, the Adama covenant land, is this wave sheaf to be offered up." It appears that this is the exact reason the counting of the OMER has been incorrect and misunderstood, as the ecclesia has been wandering through the wilderness for 40 jubilees. That is 2,000 years. So they're still wandering in that wilderness. So they've not been given the knowledge of the counting of the OMER. When locating these holy days, only JAHUAH's creation calendar can be used. Otherwise, the days are considered to be unholy and not separated unto JAHUAH. In fact, JAHUAH states that in order to obtain wisdom, we must learn to count the days. That is, to know his true calendar. Interestingly, most Bible versions instruct us in Psalms 90:12 that we should learn or be taught to number days. This is out of the King James Version. Psalms 90:12. So teach us to number our days, that we may apply our heart unto wisdom. But the Septuagint reads completely different. So we're going to start with verse 11. Psalms 90:11 and 12. Who knows the power of your rage, and how to count out his days because of the fear of your rage? So make known to me your right hand, the ones being corrected in the heart of wisdom. So here we see, make known to me your right hand. Who is at the right hand of our Creator? None other than our Messiah. So he is the land that we're entering into. We are the ones being corrected. We are the ones who are seeking the true appointed times of our Creator. We are instructed to count, whether it be 7 days, 14 days, 50 days, or 364 days. We count. Each morning the sun comes up, and we count it as a day. After counting 364 days, we know it is time to watch for the turn of the year, the day that advances us that much closer to the return of Mashiach, our groom and king. Hallelujah. And as long as we are obedient in our counting, JAHUAH will bless us by allowing us to be in his presence at his set times. Understanding JAHUAH's calendar is of the utmost importance. Why is it connected with wisdom? Because JAHUAH promised to meet with us. Therefore, his doctrine rains down like manna from heaven at these appointed times of meeting. From the Dead Sea Scrolls is a 6-year schedule of the priestly duties, in which we find year after year the counting of the OMER is to start on the 26th day of the first month. In scroll 4Q 325, we read in fragment 1, the Passover is on the 14th of the month on the 3rd day. So on the 3rd day of the week, year after year, is the Passover. We need to remember all of the appointed times are set. They don't wander through the calendar. That's why we don't use the moon to set them, because the moon is a wanderer. We use the sun, which is set and stable. So this is what this scroll is telling us. The Passover is on the 14th of the month on the 3rd day of the week. On the 18th of the month is the Sabbath of Judea. Passover ends on the 3rd day in the evening. So on the 3rd day of the week in the evening, it starts on the 14th day of the month. The Passover also ends on the 3rd day of the week in the evening, so a week later. On the 25th of the month is the Sabbath of Judea. So we're getting a clue there when the Sabbath was as well. On the 25th of the month is the Sabbath of Judea. Its responsibility includes the barley festival on the 26th of the month after the Sabbath. The beginning of the 2nd month is on the 6th day of the week of Judea. So we can clearly see that the counting towards the reaping festival is after matzos, after unleavened bread, not during. Thus again, after the resurrection. The resurrection happened during the Feast of Unleavened, so this is not tied into that. And again, in the scroll numbered 4Q 394, we find that Shavuot is observed on the 15th day of the 3rd month. Thus, counting backwards, we can confirm that the OMER count did indeed begin on the 26th day of the 1st month. We can also see an accounting of these days in the book of Acts, where Paul is traveling after Passover. Acts 20, verse 6. And we sailed across after the days of unleavened bread from Philippi, and came to them in Troas unto 5 days, where we spent 7 days. So Paul indicates that they left the day after the Feast of Unleavened Bread was over, which would have been the 22nd day of the first month. Because remember, the feast ends on the 21st day of the month, which is the 3rd day of the week. Counting out 5 days of travel would have brought us to the 26th day of the month, which is the 1st day of the week and the day of first fruits, where he stayed through until the Sabbath, which is the first Sabbath of the 2nd month. Acts 20, verse 7. And on the first of the Sabbaths, the first Sabbath of the 2nd month, the disciples having been gathered to break bread, Paul reasoned with them, being about to exit the next day, because the next day would be the first day of the week after the Sabbath. And he extended the word until midnight. So we see here on our calendar how that worked out. Leviticus 23 also lays out the set-aside days of our Creator, starting with verse 1. And the Creator spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and thou shalt say unto them, The feasts of the Creator, which ye shall call holy assemblies, these are my feasts. So in Leviticus 23, he's saying, these are my feast days. And now he starts to list them. The Sabbath, verse 3. 6 days shalt thou do works, but on the 7th day is the Sabbath, a rest, a holy convocation to the Creator. Thou shalt not do any work, it is the Sabbath to the Creator in all your dwellings. Then he tells us that we have a Passover. Verse 4. And these are the feasts to the Creator, holy convocations which ye shall call in their seasons. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month, between the evening time, is the Creator's Passover. So on the 14th day of the month, beginning at evening, the Passover begins. And on the 15th day of the month is the Feast of Unleavened Bread to the Creator. 7 days shall ye eat unleavened bread. The first day shall be a holy convocation. To you, you shall do no servile work, and you shall offer whole burnt offerings to the Creator 7 days. And the 7th day shall be a holy convocation to you. You shall do no servile work. So he told us that the Sabbath was one of his set-aside days, and then the Passover. The next is the Feast of First Fruits. When we start with verse 9. And the Creator spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and thou shalt say to them, When you shall enter into the land which I give you, and reap the harvest of it, then shall you bring a sheaf, the first fruits of your harvest, to the priests. Now he's not saying during the Feast of Unleavened you're doing this. This is after the Feast of Unleavened. He's already given us the instructions for the Feast of Unleavened. And now he's moving on to the next feast. Verse 11. And he shall lift up the sheaf before the Creator, to be accepted for you. On the morrow after the first day, the priest shall lift it up. And you shall offer on the day on which you bring the sheaf a lamb without blemish of a year old for a whole burnt offering to the Creator. And its meat offering, 2/10 portion of fine flour mingled with oil. It's a sacrifice to the Creator, a smell of sweet savor to the Creator. and its drink offering the fourth part of a hin of wine. Gotta have a little bread and wine with that meat offering. JAHUAH knows how to party. And you shall not eat bread or the new parched corn until this same day, until you offer the sacrifices of your supreme divinity. It is a perpetual statute throughout your generations and all your dwellings. Now, of course, we no longer need a animal sacrifice, as the Messiah is our everlasting sacrifice. His blood is now on the altar, but we're still under the covenant to observe those days. Our sacrifice has been placed there before our Creator already. So the animal sacrifices are done away with our Messiah, but He didn't do away with the observances of these days. So they're still part of the covenant contract between us and our Creator. And in order to inherit our kinsmen, we still need to follow these days. So after the 7 days of Passover and unleavened bread, we observe the first fruits, as the scripture does not say, like I said, during the Passover. 7 days the Passover feast is observed, then the first fruits with its instructions. And we start counting down to the Feast of Weeks, the Feast of Oaths. And that's next on his list, the Feast of Weeks, starting with verse 15. And ye shall number for yourselves from the day after the Sabbath, from the day on which you shall offer the sheaf of the heave offering, 7 full weeks. So we're counting 7 full weeks. Until the morrow after the last week, you shall number 50 days, and shall bring a new meat offering to the Creator. Now this verse 16 is a whole additional count for each of the first fruit offerings. So after the first 50 days of counting, we offer up our wheat, and then we count 50 more, and we offer up the wine, and we count 50 more, and we offer up the oil. And we will discuss that in a different video. But just know that these feasts are feasts that we lift up these first fruits in this Shavuot season, from the barley harvest and ending at Sukkot. So this whole summer time is the Shavuot season. Even though we observe the day of Shavuot, it is still the season of harvest that we bring in and have to lift up the first fruits of each of these harvests. But like I said, we'll cover that in a whole different video. Leviticus 23 verse 17. And you shall bring from your dwelling loaves as a heave offering. 2 loaves they shall be, of 2/10 portion of fine flour. They shall be baked with leaven on the first fruits of the Creator. So at Shavuot, we raise up the 2 loaves of bread. And you shall bring with the loaves 7 unblemished lambs of a year old, and 1 calf of the herd, and 2 rams without blemish, and they shall be a whole burnt offering. Offering to the Creator, and their meat offerings and their drink offerings shall be a sacrifice, a smell of sweet savor to the Creator. Verse 19, and they shall sacrifice 1 kid of the goats for a sin offering, and 2 lambs of a year old for a peace offering, with the loaves of the first fruits. And the priest shall place them with the loaves of the first fruits, an offering before JAHUAH with the 2 lambs. They shall be holy to the Creator. They shall belong to the priest that brings them. And you shall call this day a convocation. It shall be holy to you. You shall do no servile work on it. It is a perpetual ordinance throughout your generation and all your habitations. And when you shall reap the harvest of your land, You shall not fully reap the remainder of the harvest of your fields when you reap, and you shall not gather that which falls from your reaping. You shall leave it for the poor and the stranger. I am the Creator, your supreme divinity. So after the betrothal agreement is made at Shavuot, the groom makes a verbal declaration that the woman is his wife. So even though it's not the official marriage ceremony, which we observe at Sukkot, the betrothal is legally binding. So we are legally bound to our groom at Shavuot. John 14, verse 21. The one having my commandments and the one giving heed to them, that one, my betrothed, is the one loving me. And the one loving me shall be loved by my Abba. And I will love my betrothed, and I will reveal myself to my betrothed. After the announcement, they both drink wine from the cup. The groom drinks first and then gives the cup to his betrothed. Luke 22:20. He took the cup, saying, "This cup is the new, the fresh, the regenerated covenant in my blood, which is being shed out for you." This is his bride price that he paid for us. Before the groom departs to prepare a place for his betrothed, he gives her a gift, which had to be something of substantial value, not frivolous or trivial. She accepted the gift, signaling that she accepted the groom as her husband, including the contract and all of its terms. The gift given by Jahshua to his betrothed is the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit. Certainly a priceless gift. And we read in John 20:22, "And when he had said this, he breathed on them, and saith unto them, Receive you the Ruach HaKodesh." Ephesians 1:13 and 14. "In whom also you, hearing the word of truth, the gospel of our salvation, in whom also believing, you were sealed with the Ruach HaKodesh of promise, who is the earnest of our inheritance, to the redemption of the purchased possession, to praise of his glory." So we are those that are purchased, and the gift is the Ruach. Acts 2:4. "And they were all filled with the Ruach HaKodesh, given on Shavuot." When that matter was settled, the groom would then depart, and he would announce to his bride, "I go to prepare a place for you." And he would return to his father's house. And back at his father's house, he would build her bridal chamber. And the groom could not return until the father told him that the bridal chamber was completed. Because a young man wanting to return back to his bride would most likely hurriedly throw something together. But the father wants it to be perfect for the bride. So the groom must wait until the father's approval on this bridal chamber. John 14:2 and 3. "In my Father's residence are many abodes. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you to myself, so that where I am, you may be also." While the groom is away making his preparations for his new bride, the bride too is making her preparations as she moves through this Shavuot season that we were speaking of, counting 50 days from harvest to harvest, gathering in the provisions of the barley, wheat, wine, and oil to be laid out for the final wedding feast at Sukkot. Revelation 19, 7-9. Let us rejoice and be glad and give glory to him, for the marriage of the Lamb has come, and his bride has made herself ready. And it was given to her to clothe herself in fine linen, bright and clean, for the fine linen is the righteous acts of the saints. And he said to me, Write, blessed are those who are invited to the marriage of the supper of the Lamb. So hallelujah, we're in the middle of our betrothal walk towards the blessing and the marriage supper of the Lamb. So as you're counting out your OMER, this is a time to reflect on whom we will choose on the day of Shavuot. Will it be JAHUAH as our groom, or will we continue walking in the ways of the world and choose Hallel? That is the day we make our choice. So spend this time counting towards that day and letting that Ruach, that beautiful gift that the Messiah has given us, listen to her wisdom and let it lead us. So until we meet again, I'm going to wish you shalom, shalom.
Shalom, shalom.